Everyone, and welcome to this oral evidence session of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, part 2 if you like. My name's Ruth Jones, I'm the chair of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, and I'd like to welcome back the 4 witnesses we had before us last week, who we had to unfortunately cut our last session short rather abruptly. So thank you so much for returning, it's really much appreciated. So, and I'm delighted we're going to be continuing our first session today of the inquiry into promoting Wales for inward investment. And as we're looking forward to hearing from the witnesses about how Wales can make the most of its potential and attract more business investment. So first of all, before we begin, can I ask any members who have to declare any relevant interest to today's inquiry?
Claire? Thanks. So, same as last week, I just need to let you know that I'm a PPS in the Department for Business and Trade, but I'm here obviously as a backbench member of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, so just need to make sure that everybody understands that. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. Now, obviously today's session is a continuation of last week's, so hopefully you've had a week to ruminate on the issues. But I would like to say thank you so much for coming back. And would I, for the benefit of those of us who weren't here last week, could I ask you all briefly to reintroduce yourselves, please? Should we start with Professor Crescenzi, please?
My name is Riccardo Crescenzi. I'm a professor of economic geography at the London School of Economics and deputy head of department research in geography and environment. I've done research supported by the European Research Council, Horizon Europe, as well as the UK Research and Innovation on FDI, the nature of FDI, the strategies of multinational firms, focusing in particular on the subnational level, so looking at FDI beyond their macroeconomic nature and trying to understand how they choose the place where to locate their activities, in particular within countries, looking at the subnational level, and also trying to understand what type of public policies work to attract what type of FDI.
Thank you very much. Nan Williams, please.
Thank you. I'm Nan Williams. I'm the chair of GlobalWelsh, which is a small community investment company looking at Welsh diaspora globally. Day job is as an entrepreneur. I have a company which is based in London, the Middle East and Wales. And other than that, I'm a non-exec of various Welsh organisations. But here today to talk particularly about diaspora and FDI.
Thank you very much. James Gardiner, please.
Hi all, I'm James Gardiner. I'm a senior economist at Ernst & Young, focused primarily on macroeconomics and investment, and usually lead the analysis on the UK Attractiveness Survey, which is a annual FDI and sort of C-suite investment survey and publication that looks at the breakdown of investment projects across the UK, broken down to regional level. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. We may need to get you to speak up a little bit because you're a little bit muffled. It may just be my hearing, but you are a little bit muffled, I think. Thank you, James. Ken Poole, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. Ken Poole, Head of Economic Development at Cardiff Council, with over 40 years' experience in inward investment and foreign direct investment attraction. Significant spell as a director with PricewaterhouseCoopers before coming back into the public sector, working with Cardiff. A long experience in Wales in terms of advising businesses across Wales and also across the UK, working with cities and development agencies in my tenure with the private sector.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Can I start with Professor Crescenzi, maybe? And I'm just wondering about Wales's track record of attracting inward investment. How does that compare to other parts of the UK? We often look at stats. How does that compare? And how is Wales missing out on key sectors of inward investment, do you think?
Thank you. Yes, the LSE has conducted a study, this was before COVID, looking at the attraction of foreign direct investment and comparing specifically Wales and Scotland. So this is something, like there are lots of statistics and attempts to draw comparisons, looking at the position of Wales vis-à-vis the rest of the UK, but also comparing Wales with other European regions to try and see what is the position of other competitors in terms of FDI attraction, in terms of the potential to attract FDI, etc., etc. And we have also looked in preparation for this meeting into more updated data, because the statistics, of course, like the report predates COVID and data were older than that. So in the LSE study covers fundamentally the recovery phase from the 2008 2009 crisis. But I think that that's an important fact. And then we looked at more updated data to look at what happened following the recovery phase, and then COVID, and then the post-COVID. So we have, like, what I will discuss now is a more general picture. And when looking at inward FDI in Wales, we see that Wales has never recovered from the 2008-2009 crisis. So that's the big change in landscape in terms of inward FDI. This is true when looking at the number of projects, but it is particularly evident when looking at the dollar value of the investment. So the 2008-2009 crisis is the big turning point, because there was a general contraction in FDI in general coming to the UK, but the country bounced back as a whole, while Wales didn't manage. So that's the big change in terms of FDI landscape. However, I think another important dimension is the Brexit and the changing relationship between the UK and the European Union. If we look at the national composition of investment coming into Wales, but also going from Wales towards abroad, we see a very important role of Europe, of the EU 15, 14, so the old member states, as well as Central Eastern Europe when it comes to outward investment. Therefore, the combined effect of COVID as well as the changing relationship with the EU has, of course, changed the value proposition of Wales once again. And if we look at the more recent data following the referendum, so post-2000, from 2017 onward, it's not really like COVID, the big change in landscape. It's mostly like the referendum. And so from 2017 onward, we see that Wales struggles in terms of FDI, while even looking, the data that we are looking into are new greenfield projects. So this is not the net. Looking also at divestment. That's the new inflows of investment. While we know that in general, like for the UK, for the first time in the past couple of years, we have recorded a negative inflow, meaning that capital that is leaving the UK is more than the capital that is attracted through new investment. So only looking at the net inflows, what comes new, Wales is lagging behind vis-a-vis the rest of the country. And this is also mirrors very well the change in composition of the investment in terms of the national composition. Western Europe remains a very important geography, and this, of course, is a challenge because it very much depends on the relationship with the EU, and the relationship with the EU has a fundamental importance in understanding the value proposition of Wales, as well as it's also important to keep in mind exposure vis-a-vis the US. So now there are additional challenges coming from the international landscape. So when assessing the position of Wales, in my view, we need to consider local factors, so Wales-specific factors, as well as very carefully place Wales in the context of the national politics and national political decisions, as well as in the global geopolitical landscape.
Thank you very much. I suppose, Mr. Gardiner, you were nodding then. Do you, in terms of comparisons with, say, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England, how is Wales doing?
I think it could probably be summarised as being comparatively low to those other regions. There's not anything that was said there that I would disagree with. I think tracking the market share of investment is quite important in this context. And what we see is that there is a perhaps over-reliance, you could call it, of investment coming from traditional European partners and origins of investment, where we see the UK performing better elsewhere in other developed nations is in expanding the diversity of that investment by origin. So whether that's Indian investment, Chinese investment, Australian investment, which have all increased by market share into other parts of the UK in recent years, or whether that is by activity and sector, which have also gained in more diversity in other areas. So if we look, for instance, at the northwest of England, we've seen a market increase in the diversity of sectoral investments, but also the activity that is driving those investments has become more diverse over time. And I think that's something where Wales has been subject to some pretty significant global headwinds in the past 10 years. But other parts of the country have managed to capitalize on that investment where Wales has not. And it's led to a sort of dwindling of FDI projects into Wales, and also, we do tend to see, obviously, that the vast majority of that would go into cities, but that is not uncommon compared to other parts of the UK too. FDI investment, particularly net new investment, does tend to gravitate to a sort of major population density first, and then expansionary investment follows. So I don't think there's anything inherently controversial about that.
Thank you very much. Henry Tufton's got a supplementary question.
I was just wondering, Professor Crescenzi, you were talking a lot about the Brexit and about the 2008 financial crisis in terms of those big economic factors. I mean, those economic factors would implicate Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, all across the board, as has just been talked about. But in terms of those specific things and the impact on Wales more generally, are you able to give a bit more context as to why Wales would be particularly susceptible? I appreciate the comments about urban centres and reliance on particular countries, but I would wonder whether you could give further comment on that.
Absolutely. I think the key point here is that the exposure to these global shocks is relatively even. So you might have, depending on the sectoral composition of the different regions, you might have a different degree of exposure. Some sectors, think about the impact of COVID, for example, some sectors were more affected than others. However, these global shocks affect in a relatively similar manner everyone. What makes a big difference is the reaction. So it's the ability to bounce back and then recover from the shock. And it is clear that Wales struggle more than other nations in terms of bouncing back following the crisis. There are a number of reasons, depending on the sectoral composition of the investment, as well as the nature of the activities. And if we look at what is it that multinationals do in Wales, this is more linked with more traditional manufacturing. And this has, of course, also suffers also from changes in terms of technologies. And therefore, when firms are hit by the shock, then they decide, okay, where can I move production? How can I respond to the shock? Am I going to continue as I was doing before, or am I going to move activities elsewhere? So that's the combination of these effects, the sectoral nature, the functional nature of the investment, as well as the specific advantage of Wales that was as a sort of like gateway vis-a-vis the EU. So if we look at the geography of the inflow and outflow, so investment coming into Wales, as well as investment going from companies based in Wales outside of the country, we do see a strong projection towards Europe. So these, while other regions and other nations may be are more diversified in terms of their investment portfolio. And as a result, Wales is more affected and has been more affected by changes in relationship that are like so close to its pre-existing value proposition. That's where the challenge is in terms of reinventing the position of Wales as a destination for global investment, given the changing landscape.
Helpful. Anne Davis, please.
Thank you. Last week we discussed about the barriers for inward investment, and if I can start with Ms Williams here, how do we, and I'll ask you all in turn if you want to have a little think about your answers, how can we overcome the barriers, and which should the government really prioritise in order to have the quickest and the most effective result, really?
Yeah. So in the research that we've done, there are long-term barriers, medium to long-term, such as infrastructure, transportation, for example, which consistently come up, but they will take a long time to fix. That's not to say we shouldn't continue on that journey. They are important. Shorter term, my view is that we have an underused resource, in particular in the diaspora, 3 million overseas compared with 3 million in Wales. A large majority of those are in the private sector. They've left Wales, they're highly educated, I think 45% of them at master's level and above, and they now do cross-reference with the Welsh Government strategic sectors very, very well. So 25% of the people we've identified are in tech in some way, and they've typically either built businesses or worked in businesses overseas, and therefore they have a very international outlook. Now, we do diaspora relations very differently from other countries such as Scotland or Ireland, for example. And it's much more disparate. It is acknowledged as very important, but it's very disparate. So I think there is something there that we could do, which by being more connected, public and private sector, and more data-driven, collectively, we could do more quickly. And the second point is really that connectivity. I don't know why, but we appear to be less connected maybe across academia, public sector, regions, government, national government, than potentially other competitive countries are, and I know my colleagues here will talk about that as well. So I think, again, that is something we can work on. I see that as a case for optimism, actually, because there are some things in the relatively near term that we could do, which hopefully would improve the position.
Thank you. Diolch. Mr Gardiner?
He heard you.
Sorry, just coming off mute. So I think in terms of barriers, there are a number that come across in our survey to investors as being repeat mentions. So, it's quite important that we talk about the business fundamentals are often quite, and the sort of cultural fundamentals are things that investors frequently talk about when they're investing outside of London and when they're investing in what would be considered sort of regional investment or expansionary investment. I think infrastructure has already been mentioned. Perception of skills, I think, is a big thing. And the ability for these local regions, usually led by IDAs or an investment body, to kind of connect with investors early in the due diligence phase is very, very important. And I think this is a barrier based on inaction at the moment, in Wales in particular. So I think what we've seen long-term in our data across Europe is that the investment landscape has become much, much more competitive, much more interventionist, and those regions which have been performing very well have typically been led on the front foot by a very active sort of local IDA or an arm's length body that's representing the region, but is making contact in market, is connecting them to the strategically important players, and is kind of getting them early in the due diligence phase of investment planning. I think where we see regions dwindling in numbers or perhaps not being a target for investment is where the assumption is that people will just naturally come. And I think that's probably been a mistake in a period where we've seen a lot of subsidies in the investment space, a lot of tax breaks, and really a lot of local regional bodies and IDAs have kind of had to get their elbows out. And I think that's probably where personally, I see organizations like Midas in the Northwest or Scottish Enterprise being very front-footed. And they're in market, they're connecting with major executives, they're promoting the brand very visually and sort of selling the key sectors and the key sort of attractive KPIs of the region. So in terms of barriers to investment, I think Wales, and not just Wales, but other regions in the UK, have an issue with not having necessarily that same level of activist sort of investment body spearheading the region in market, and strategically across 3 to 4 priority markets would probably capture the lion's share of investment. So there isn't a need to be targeting a very, very long list of countries or anything. There are clearly a number of countries that make up the lion's share of investment into the UK as a whole.
Thank you. Mr. Poole?
Thank you, Chair. From a Cardiff perspective, we're at the sort of end of the food chain in terms of FDI inquiries, with both UK government and Welsh government really leading the field, and obviously we hope that investment leads will be passed our way. As the previous speakers identified, there has been a reduction in FDI activity. So from a Cardiff perspective, with our investment and growth indicators, we've had to go out and do our own thing as well and supplement the more traditional ways of attracting investment. But it's still quite clear from the marketplace that it's the macro conditions are still key. Businesses are attracted into UK or Wales and Cardiff by the political stability, by the general economic tax and fiscal environment. And UK, Wales, and Cardiff has always been seen as an area where risk can be reduced. But at the regional level, as I mentioned last week, there's still a perception issue. Despite this being very, very close to London, it's still viewed as being a little peripheral. But a key driver today in all sectors, be it manufacturing, be it cybersecurity, fintech, financial services, the key issue we see is skills availability. And investors want to be convinced that we have the necessary skills in place with which to help address their growth potential. And importantly, if we haven't those skills in place, I think it's key, we find it very key, that they can see there's intervention on the ground to improving the situation. So in Cardiff, for example, in Newport and the city region, a lot of work is being undertaken in terms of generating skills pathways into sectors like cyber, like fintech, compound semiconductors. So it's very important that despite the skills challenges everywhere across the UK, we in Cardiff and Wales can be seen to be intervening successfully to address those skills barriers. And I often believe that investors will gravitate to you if they believe we are intervening successfully and hitting their investment criteria, particularly in relation to the skills needs of the business, because after all, that's the lifeblood of any business. And if I was just make one comment back to the last topic about Wales's success in terms of FDI, and the analysis suggests that we haven't been as successful in recent years in terms of attracting FDI. I think an interesting question, perhaps we can examine a bit later. We did get it right in the 70s. I'm old enough to remember those days when Wales was attracting large levels of investment, particularly manufacturing investment from Japan, from Korea, USA. We got it right because we understood the market there. And I guess we should be examining why perhaps we're not doing as well in the current range of sectors that are dominating FDI as perhaps some of the other regions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Poole. Very briefly, if you're willing, Professor, do you think the government should be prioritising skills, as Mr. Poole mentioned? Then is that where you think the government should be prioritising?
So in terms of prioritizing efforts, I agree that skills are an important matter, and it is important to think about skills not only in terms of tertiary education, university degrees, but also in terms of professional skills. Yeah. So to look at the entire supply chain and understand what type of needs are binding for different sectors. So I definitely agree that the availability of skills is a major issue. I think that thinking about skills needs to be part of a more systemic thinking. So all the issues that we mentioned, like we call an ecosystem for the investment, that involves the supply of skills, that involves, what type of infrastructure needs to be in place for these skills to go where they want to go and live where they want to live and have the lifestyle that they aim to achieve. Means using digital technologies in a creative manner, for example. Sometimes firms in manufacturing now need to combine design elements, but designers do not want to live in certain areas. So it's very difficult, close to impossible to attract them there. So how do you deal with this challenge? I've been looking at a particular case study of a very large multinational in Italy, for example, that needed to address the challenge. Was possible for them to attract in a remote area next to the Dolomites engineers, because they liked living in a more remote area and do their work. But for designers, no way, they wanted to be in Milan. So what they needed to do is to create digital connections in a way as to allow the designers to be in the environment that makes more sense for them and feed knowledge and feed ideas into the engineering space to deliver the final product. So you need to think in a systemic manner in terms of the needs of skills in a geographical sense and how to make it possible for skills to match and click with the investment. So this is to say that the point of having a proactive investment promotion policy is particularly important, and having a body that can think systematically across different dimensions. So it's not only about talking to investors, but that's about developing the right type of skills, presenting investors with the skills that are available. We say in our work that investment promotion agencies can work as plumbers of the pipelines that are needed to create a functioning system. That's like a little bit what Wales might need, and skills are a very important part of this systemic puzzle.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to make some pleas for short answers if possible, please. It's I know it's difficult because there's a lot to cover, but I'm going to bring in Andrew Ranger.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was just to follow up on your response to my colleague, Mr. Poole, before about the skills. And if it was, is it across the board? Is it university? Is it schools? Is it how we approach it altogether? And is the system reactive enough to get these skills that we need? Mr. Poole, I don't know if you can elaborate a bit further on that.
It's across the board because different sectors, different businesses require different skill sets. And what we've tried to do in Cardiff and the Cardiff capital region is actually look at various aspects of the labour market and develop skills pathways so businesses can actually target schools through our Capital Cardiff initiative. They can also have a clear access into universities, and particularly universities that provide particular products to suit the sectors, such as semiconductors, for example, or cybersecurity, but also demonstrate that there's ways in which businesses can actually address social mobility, providing them access to schools and access to our communities, but also providing support infrastructure there. Generally, we're well known in Wales for our university infrastructure, and it performs particularly well. The feedback I have from businesses is that the universities in Wales are hungry. They want investment. They want commercial relationships, but it's developing clear pathways for businesses to show how they can access skills at a variety of levels. And that's one thing we're particularly active in working with businesses to open up the market and open their eyes to the wider employment opportunities within the labour market in Cardiff and the Cardiff capital region.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Henry Tufnell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on something you just mentioned, Mr. Poole, about the ability in terms of that inward investment in the 1970s. You remarked about different countries and their ability to invest. And I just wanted to compare it to what Professor Crescenzi mentioned earlier in terms of the link with the linking to Europe and how that has had a dramatic impact since Brexit. I was wondering whether you could comment more generally on that and whether the membership of the European Union in terms of our joining of the European Economic Community, the impact that's had on Wales, and whether that has and the impact that's had on our foreign direct investment.
Yeah, no, it's when we look back at the 70s and early 80s, what was different in Wales? Well, first of all, we had an arm's length body, the Welsh Development Agency, doing the promotion, attracting, marketing, and hand-holding. But also, importantly, we targeted the sectors that were growing. We knew which sectors wanted to come into Europe to actually feed the European community, automotive, electronics companies, etc. So we identified the right sectors, And then we identified the key factors that were important to those sectors. They wanted low-cost land, advanced manufacturing buildings, access to good quality semi-skilled labour, good communications, good accessibility, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure into Europe, and incentives. And we got it right. And as a result of getting it right, we were very successful in attracting very large clusters of Japanese, US, Korean, Taiwanese investments. So I think that was the important factor. And one of the key drivers for them was access to Europe. Now, we in Cardiff, we have a small but very specialised advanced manufacturing sector. So we don't come across too many manufacturing businesses that have raised the issue of Brexit, but we know through existing businesses, business with Europe is much more challenging. We have steel companies in Cardiff that say the same thing. Business is much more challenging. So that must be a deterrent somewhere within the system for businesses. For businesses. But I think importantly, the principles we adopted many years ago, which were successful, are the same principles I think that could be successful today. Understanding the market, understanding the key sectors, and understanding their drivers, and then putting together a product that meets their requirements. And I think those principles are still sound. What we don't have, obviously, in the old days, is an arm's length body like Scotland or Northern Ireland that are tackling the marketplace. And importantly, when you look at Scotland particularly, they've been consistent players in the market for a very, very, very long time. So investors know if they go to Scotland, there's an established agency. Whereas in Wales, we've chopped and changed a lot for a variety of reasons. But Scotland have been consistent. And when we have a look at the investment figures that Scotland threw up, they're quite impressive. So amongst that mixture, I think there's some interesting analysis that deserves further unpicking.
I'm sure we will carry on unpicking in a minute. I'm going to move on to Ben later.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Crescenzi, you mentioned in an earlier answer just how much of an impact the changing economic and geopolitical situation is having. And set against that sort of background, are there any particular things you think Wales should be focusing on as a matter of urgency to try and make it a more competitive destination for inward investment? If there were top three things that you would tell the Welsh and UK governments, right, these are the things you need to be doing?
I think there are different dimensions. The first that I was reflecting on is not only focus on new greenfield, on new investment, but focus on the needs of investment and foreign investors that are already present. Right. Because what we discuss is a successful history of FDI attraction. This means that there is a stock of investment of foreign activities in place. And we know that also as a result of technological change, as well as different changing relationship with the single market, like current investors might be rethinking about their strategies. And these strategies sometimes do not change overnight, but are just slowly moving activities in different subsidiaries. So I think there is an issue of like priority, yes, a focus on inward, but new inward investment, also focusing on the needs, and they are easier also to talk to, understand what their needs are, what are the bottlenecks that they face. So focus on existing expansions, facilitating expansions, and preventing divestment would be a priority in my view. The second point is understanding the sectoral profile of investment that are coming. So a very important share of new inward investment in Wales are in the energy sector. So there is a very important reflection to be made there, because these investment inflate the capital value of the investment. So if you look at the dollar value, you see like in capital flowing, but they do not generate many jobs. So if the issue is job creation, the development of sustainable local economic development, also to reflect on what are really the type of investment that we want to prioritize. And the third element is certainly like the one of the elements that changed vis-à-vis the 1970s is also the regional policy framework. So when we looked at the impact of the regional development policies implemented by the EU, there are two clear cases of success. Eastern Germany was a big example of where like European policies made a difference, and Wales. So that's where like EU cohesion funds were spent in a way that was leading to additional job creation, for example. And it fits exactly the bill in terms of creating jobs by addressing skill gaps. So I think what is very important is to have a clear policy framework. Because this also, like the EU policy framework had many drawbacks, but the advantage was stability. 7-year programming cycle, the same type of policies implemented throughout the continent. So for investors, it was very easy to read. And I think this is also an important part of the value proposition. What type of regional policies? What are the priorities? And presenting skills, infrastructure, digital infrastructure as a priority becomes very important to make things happen on the ground, but also in terms of conversations with foreign investors.
Again, just on that last point, at the moment, you'll be aware of the different growth regions in Wales and the different growth plans. Is there a danger, because Wales is a very small country, of too much fragmentation and making it too difficult or complicated for investors? If you have a Mid-Wales growth area, you have a Cardiff city region, North Wales economic ambition, or should we perhaps be looking at an overall Welsh growth plan?
I mean, this is not only like a challenge in Wales, that's throughout the country, the issue of like fragmentation in terms of value proposition and even internal competition. So when we look at the structure of investment promotion in the UK, we see a very different structure vis-à-vis other European countries. And we see that there are multiple national level bodies. Then there is not always clarity in terms of what are the relevant subnational bodies dealing with foreign investors. And then there is fragmentation going at the city level. So this is a big challenge for investment. Absolutely. The idea of having an investment promotion agency, a dedicated body, a phone number to call, like the study that the LSE, the comparative study that we did for the ESRC comparing Scotland and Wales, for Scotland we had like a contact point and we had a chapter on investment promotion. For Wales, it is not in the study. So having a phone number to call for like the whole macro region is very important. So absolutely, fragmentation is a risk.
Thank you. I see Mr. Gardiner wants to come in on that point.
Yeah, I would back up some of that pretty strongly. To that point of who are we picking up the phone call, or who's picking up the phone on going line by line through the investments for Wales, it's not such a clear answer. We speak every year to Scottish Enterprise, InvestNI, Midas, Oxbridge Arc, Growth Company, Business for London, but Wales is always sort of conspicuously quite silent. So I think there's to the point of the three kind of focus areas. I think knowledge is power in terms of investment. So there needs to be a body, as Ken was saying, probably better arm's length, that is much closer to business and is looking at, can go line by line through all the investments coming into Wales in the way that Scottish Enterprise already does. Is looking at the strategic direction in terms of the markets that are being focused on. So can essentially answer off the bat who the focus target countries are for origin of investment, and has an emotional relationship with businesses that is understanding, okay, well, we have a manufacturing business over here. We know they want to expand, and we know that expansionary investment makes up a very large share of the investment profile. It's not all just net new executives coming in and throwing a lot of money around. A lot of it is sort of long-term investment planning. The second thing, as I said or alluded to, is that arm's length body. So, a dedicated team in the way that certainly Northern Ireland and Scotland seems to have, very front-footed in market. And then probably speaking to the focused areas and the discussion around skills. Skills always comes up every year as one of the big topics of discussion from investors. Is particularly acute in the manufacturing space. And what we see is actually money being left on the table quite often. So in other parts of the UK, we've seen instances where businesses are saying, we have demand to increase the amount of investment here. We just do not have the apprentices, the graduates, the manufacturing skills in place in order to make that, and we have to shift it to our other locations. So those would be my sort of 3 points, and backing up the point that, you know, there is a bit of a data gap, I think, around investment. That is true across other parts of the country, but I think other regions do it quite well, and I think it's something that Wales needs.
Thank you very much. That's very useful. Ms Williams, you mentioned earlier about the diaspora and something this committee has been interested in the past. Could you perhaps just elaborate on how you think we could be better leveraging, I suppose, the skills, the expertise, the networks of the Welsh diaspora to bring more inward investment to Wales?
And I think there's two main ways, and we've done a piece of research researching the diaspora themselves, 1,700 people, very up to date. And prior to that, we did a connector survey, much smaller, but much more qualitative. So we found that they are both very good connectors into their own markets, into investors in those markets, and into trying to signpost people back to Wales. To hook it up with the point that my two colleagues here just made, though, that signposting of where to go, how to go, where are the routes to go is very unclear to people in the diaspora as well. The second piece is about these people who either wish to invest or would be entrepreneurs, probably setting up, so not the massive businesses, but a lot of businesses that could have a strong impact on Wales, and they are doing it elsewhere. They're taking that money somewhere. And so that would be the second way to encourage those people to come back. Because if you think of it as a sales funnel, I'm in sales and marketing, right? So if you've got a warm audience, they know something, you're many steps down that funnel in when you then try and talk to them. So it's a warm audience, but it gets to a point where the signposting potentially is not there clearly enough, I would say.
And you mentioned, very briefly, Chair, other countries, I think you mentioned Ireland, you mentioned Scotland, are better at facilitating or making the most of their respective diasporas. To what extent are they aided by the fact that they have an investment promotion agency that they can just signpost people?
I think we've come to the conclusion, despite our best efforts as a small kind of volunteer company, that it's critically important. And the reason it's important, of course, is because of investment, but it's actually about connectivity again. I think it needs to be a public-private, academic, cohesive grouping put through something. And so I think it really is important. They've been doing it longer. They clearly have much better data. You know, we have a bunch of data. Welsh Government has a bunch of data. I know university alumni associations, for example, have masses of data and connections which could also be used. But I'm not convinced we're really pulling it together.
Thank you. That's Mr. Poole. Sorry.
Just building on the diaspora point, we in Cardiff have an ambassadorial network that we set up a few years ago, which we use to actually attract investment into the city, particularly conference investment into the city, and that's been quite successful. We found a degree of enthusiasm from key players within the wider business community, university community, research community in Cardiff to embark on the promotional program. The key challenge is with us to keep those ambassadors actually informed of developments in the city in order to give them enough ammunition with which to promote and market Cardiff when they travel overseas. But it has been successful, and I'm not sure whether many of you have picked up recently. We had a further launch in London of our ambassadorial network, and we promoted a Mr. Gareth Bale as an ambassador to help in terms of promotional activity. So I certainly agree that diaspora, I think, is an important area that we can exploit further for the benefit of Wales and the benefit of various parts of Wales, Cardiff, Newport, West Wales, North Wales as well.
Thank you very much. That's very useful. Thank you. All.
Steve Witherden, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Mr. Gardiner. Mr. Gardiner, last week we explored how the future world of work is going to look radically different to how it looks now. How can Wales ensure its promotion strategies are future-proofed against major shifts in the Welsh economy? For example, as a result of AI advances. Now, we did discuss this previously, but I'm very eager to learn if any concrete examples that you could elaborate upon. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think last week I talked about a focus on prioritizing the sort of origin of investment. I think I would expand on that to say that demonstrating a thorough pipeline of skills into that sector and into what I guess economists would call sort of high value add sectoral benefit was probably the way to go. I think that to the point earlier, which I think was being made around, other collaborations with other regions across the UK, investment is often thought of as quite zero sum, and particularly investment bodies here in the UK often mistakenly think they're in competition with other regions of the UK, as opposed to competitively on a much more sort of international stage. And I think that's very true of the kind of technologies of the future investment. So what we've seen in the past decade to 2 decades is, Ken discussed about what were we doing right internally in the 70s. I think actually a really big feature of decades of changing investment profile is, we've become much more competitive in Europe. And that's true of a lot of the cities and regions across the European Union and the surrounding region that have really picked up their game in the investment space around technologies of the future. So I think there's something about complementarity within the UK market and about being a lot more external facing to the wider EU market. So a hardware business in Wales might also look to complement itself with a software business in Manchester, and sort of understanding that the proposition for a lot of businesses coming to Wales may actually reside in investments already being made in other parts of the country. So not seeing a major AI investment in Cambridge and going, oh, well, how come we didn't get that? But instead looking at it and saying, how can that be built out, and what does Wales have to offer that is a form of sort of expansionary investment in that space? And I think therein lies, the trick to getting some of that sort of golden touch of those sectors of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Gardiner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Henry Tufnell, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's about monitoring inward investments. I think we've already touched upon the data, and just conscious that there's limitations on that data, particularly when you look at Wales in terms of the devolved areas and then also in rural locations as well. I was wondering whether you could comment on how government could potentially address these limitations. If Mr. Gardiner, if you could go first, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I can talk about this issue all day, I think. Please. So the reason we actually conduct our analysis in the first place largely stems from a lot of inadequacies in the data. We receive data from DBT, from regional investment bodies. We look to clean it, and we present a sort of a presentation of investment that we think accurately reflects the situation on the ground. And that's because there's a lot of noise in investment data. There's a lot of non-declaration of values. There's a lot of sort of false claiming around job creation. There's trying to spread announcements over several years. So there is a sort of fundamental issue in how investment data is presented to those of us that collect it, and then gets repackaged and delivered up. Where I think this is done very well, and I guess if you're looking for a champion to focus on, is I think Scottish Enterprise already do this very well. The past few years, I go line by line through all the Scottish investments, and we've never once had a discrepancy. And I think that comes from having a dedicated team who, already understand the investment profile coming into the country. They're connected with DBT, they're connected with their local investment teams, for whether it's Scottish Enterprise or InvestNI or whatever. but there is somebody who can pick up the phone and essentially talk through all the investments in the country, and they are correctly counting it sort of in the correct calendar or financial year. They are following up with those businesses and saying, how many jobs did you actually create? And they also have a sort of a hold over the capex values that are involved. That is very poorly done across Europe. It is done better in the UK than other European countries, but I think there are champions to look to and say, these guys do it right. And for me, that would be a combination of Scottish Enterprise are very over the detail, Midas are very front-facing in their engagement with business, which I think is very commendable. And it's a sort of combination of those that I think Wales needs.
Thank you. I don't know whether Professor Crescenzi, you had anything more to comment in respect to the data point?
I agree with what was said before, and I think AI in this sense is very helpful. It makes the cost of collecting this information, checking, a lot lower. So what was possible like even 5 years ago, what was very difficult 5 years ago, it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper now through the use of AI, not only in terms of having more accurate estimate of the investment value, but also getting a better sense of what the investment is about. So what are the true activities that investors are pursuing in a particular like establishment in a particular region, because it allows us to understand a lot better what their needs can be, what their potential in terms of wider development is. So AI can play a very important role in this regard.
There's never been a better moment right now to catch up on our data deficiency, to come back to the previous point. We can do that now. We just have to be minded to do it using the tools.
Mr. Poole, I don't know whether, I'm conscious you got your hand up, but I don't know whether in terms of providing practical examples in terms of Cardiff Council, that would be helpful.
Yes, I think from a Welsh perspective, what would be very, very helpful, I think, if the data on FDI attraction, for example, could be broken down at a sub-regional level as well, or a city regional level, or even a local authority level. That's always useful, I think, in analysing how effective we've been and understanding where the projects are going to in Wales and why they're going to those particular levels. So I think the data is collected, but I don't think it's ever published. And I think that would help both policymakers, both practitioners, and also businesses as well to understand, some of that detail. Also, another area I think where we could, and this is probably across the UK, and I know the colleagues in the private sector probably do this with their clients, but equally undertake impact of investors post-investment. There's quite a lot of work done on prior to winning the investment, but it's often important to follow through and understand what have the investors achieved, and investment analysis post-investment, I think, could be helpful as well.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I wanted to move on to the landscape. I'm conscious in terms of the investment landscape, particularly from a government point of view, and I'm conscious that we've talked a lot about the individual phone line. So I'm conscious there might be some duplication, but if you look across all the different networks in respect of UK government, you have the Office for Investment. It's a joint unit with HM Treasury Number 10, Department of DBT, and that's before you get into the networks of embassies and missions. And then if you get down into Welsh Government with Trade and Invest Wales, and then you get to the summits and Wales Investment Summits and Wales Invested in terms of the campaign. I mean, it's quite, I was wondering whether you thought that was too complicated for investors, or whether there was a way of streamlining that, and your views on it. Mr. Gardiner, sorry.
Yes, I'm happy to jump in. I think locally empowered investment bodies require more resource and effort, if I'm honest. The ones that have done well, and particularly if you focus on, say, Scotland and the northwest of England, they really have much more capacity, resource, ability to engage their market. And that may be a function of the size of those economies and the density, but it is certainly the way to go for regional investment bodies in Wales, Northern Ireland, rural England. And I think an overly centralized, simplified investment body probably would come up against the sort of classic issues of devolution, a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of the local market. And to my money anyway, I think a body like Midas in England, or a combination of those character features of Scottish Enterprise and Midas, is a good model for Wales, but it needs dedicated resource, and it needs people who are sort of over the data, much more connected with business, and are sort of strategizing around the market conditions as they are now. Because just to pick on one particular point, investment has been very transactional for the past 5 or 6 years. i.e., C-suite investors have been looking for discounts, tax incentives under an umbrella of largely American-led subsidies. We are now moving into a fundamentally different environment, and if I was sitting as a local IDA or an investment body, I would be focusing on trying to understand those key markets and sectors, and then aggressively pursuing them simplified, but from a very Welsh perspective. So I sense your sort of frustration at the number of bodies. I think it's probably shared, but I do think it's essential, because actually the markets are very fundamentally different. The share of manufacturing in Scotland as a percentage of GDP is very fundamentally different to other parts of the country. And that's as true about Wales as it is about any other region in the UK. So I would say empower those devolved investment bodies more.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, I think you've got your hand up.
Yes, what's interesting, if you look at the marketplace, particularly within England, and the growth of the city regions and corporate joint committees and new mayors, they're now taking a lot more interest in FDI and looking to attract more money and influence to promote their city regions. So in England, they're untangling FDI. They're trying to untangle FDI activity from government, and going back to the days where they had a sub-regional, regional promotional effort. So I think that's going to be an area where we're going to see a lot more competition arising, which is going to place us under a lot more pressure, I think in Wales as well, because the city regions are becoming more powerful, significant budgets, and it's an area that we're going to have to watch carefully. Otherwise, we can see the rise of new agencies, city agencies across England, which will make them even more competitive. And when you think the success of the city regions like Manchester currently and Birmingham are doing particularly well in terms of attracting FDI, it's worth noting the way that the English system is moving.
Can I just ask, are you doing anything specifically in Cardiff in response to that?
Well, yeah. As I say, we're at the end of the food chain. Sorry, in terms of investment promotion, we can't go out to the wider international market. But what we're trying to do is a range of initiatives. For example, we build on our proximity to London and actively targeting investors in London, recognising that London contains a huge investment community, an international investment community, and pushing and promoting the city as being as close, very, very close to London, and getting even closer. So the event we held in London 3 weeks ago was designed to bring investors in to understand the growth and innovation potential of Cardiff. That's where we use Mr. Bale as well as part of the ambassadorial activity. But using our diaspora, for example, attending promotional events like MIPIM in Cannes, the team with the Cardiff capital region, were in MIPIM in France very, very recently, promoting the wares of the Cardiff capital region to investors. So it's trying to be as nimble as possible, but equally we all rely on the national marketing and FDI campaigning of UK government and Wales government. So obviously seeing healthy investment figures coming through from those bodies is beneficial, but we've learned that we can't just rely on those trends. We have to do our own thing in order to maintain investment momentum in our city, which is growing significantly.
Thank you. Before I hand back to the Chair, can I ask Professor Crescenzi whether you had anything further to comment on that, Ms. Williams?
Yeah, I would like to highlight that subnational matters, in the sense that proximity to the place where the investment happens matters for FDI attraction and retention. So definitely it is important to think locally about FDI, and we have evidence when looking at FDI attraction to the whole of Europe that the subnational level, in particular in less developed regions, investment promotion agencies are successful in attracting additional FDI vis-à-vis what would have happened without the agency. However, it's very important to keep in mind two issues. The first is the targeting. So these agencies need to have a very clear mandate and needs to focus their efforts on specific sectors where the region has an already existing advantage. The second point, and this links with the Harrington review of FDI in the UK, the idea of streamlining, on simplifying the FDI promotion architecture, so the overarching structure for the country, is fundamentally important. So that's true. There is a risk of too many layers, of possible conflicts, of what is called territorial competition, having neighboring jurisdictions fighting for the same investment. So this is a very expensive type of competition to have, and one that can be addressed by having investment promotion efforts focused at the right spatial scale.
I just reinforce what Ken Poole said. So for diaspora, it is also very important and clear in the research that they have a passion for their own bit of Wales, not necessarily where they were born, but what they're connected to. So that might be where they were born, where they went to university, where they went to school. It could be all sorts of things. And I do think streamlining is one thing, but I think better coordination between, so that you are using the same overarching message for Wales with sub-messages beneath that, is actually the way to go. It needs to be coordinated and it needs to be consistent, but to allow for difference, to attract different sectors or different individuals as investors.
Thank you. There's no, Professor Crescenzi, there's no conflict between saying, in terms of focus on the local, and an increase in that competition between localities rather than having a more national approach?
Well, one thing is like adapting the message in highlighting the strengths of the different places. A different thing is like all going after the same investment. To give you an example, in the call for evidence for this inquiry, there was an emphasis on the idea of can we maybe focus on investment in creative industries in the UK as a way forward for Wales. Okay, so what I did is I looked at the data that we have collected. The LSE has surveyed all investment promotion agencies in Europe and all labs in the UK, and I said, okay, let's see how many of the existing or pre-existing investment promotion bodies are trying to do the same thing. And 1 in 4, so 9 out of 39 investment promotion bodies in the UK are targeting arts, recreation and sports, for example. So this means that in a relatively restricted investment space, there is a lot of competition of different places. So one thing is tailoring your message to cater the interest of different type of investors, in particular when leveraging diaspora, for example, where leveraging the foreign network of existing firms that might channel investment back from the foreign countries where they have invested. So tailoring the message, absolutely. But this shouldn't come with a diffusion of efforts into too many different priority sectors that trigger competition, because everyone ends up focusing very narrow niches of investment in competition with each other without a clear overarching value proposition.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Steve Witherdon, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask, firstly, Professor Crescenzi, the creative industries have had notable success in attracting inward investment to Wales. So how can Wales learn from innovative partnerships in the creative sector?
So here, it is important to understand that it is a crowded space. And it is very important also to understand, okay, what type of connections can be created. Another important point is going, like as was said before, going beyond the attraction of the investment and thinking about the entire investment journey. So with appropriate incentives, maybe we can be successful in attracting investments in this sector, but then how about their wider impact and how about their embeddedness in the local economy? So it's very important to understand what can be the value proposition there when it comes to the creative industries, in particular, given that this is like an area where new technologies play a very important role. So the role of AI, think about the music industry or the generation of new content, we really don't know in which direction these things might play. So it's an area where I'll be very cautious because of the inherent risk. And maybe trying to focus more on existing investors and try to focus on their expansion and trying to focus efforts on the attraction of complementary investment vis-a-vis complementary to what exists already might be, in the medium run, a lower risk strategy in this area.
Thank you. I did have a follow-up question, but before I go to that, could I bring Mr. Gardiner in on that?
I think my opinion about sort of the creative sector as it relates to FDI is a mixed one. So I think for some regions it becomes important because of the sort of GVA growth or the sort of economic growth driving it in the domestic market. But it should be noted that it makes up a relatively smaller portion of FDI coming into most regions across the UK. So I think in terms of perspective and in terms of, the flows of FDI and what makes the UK and Wales an attractive place, the creative sectors industry and, however it's defined under sort of ONS classification, it may not be necessarily the right focus for versus, say, something like advanced manufacturing, for instance. So probably one to be cautious of, and in terms of defining investment within the domestic market and the local market versus what you're going to the foreign direct investment executives for and how you're targeting them.
Ms. Williams, you wanted to come in?
Very quickly, I don't disagree necessarily. However, the one thing that the creative industries in Wales does have is literally visibility, right? And fame. So we are known for it. What else are we known for or want to be known for? And if you want to be known for 12 things, you're not going to be known for any of them. If it's a set number of things, and then you can pull things in on the back of that, I think that has a philosophical point that might be worth bearing in mind about the creative industries and what that has achieved, even though it is relatively small compared to other sectors.
And Mr. Poole, you wanted to come in as well.
Very briefly,
just following up on those comments, I think in Wales we've been successful in attracting creative industries. And in Cardiff as well, it's a key part of the sector. And I was pleased to hear the balance that's needed. And I think we have that balance in Wales. We have a strong homegrown sector that's grown up initially through servicing the Welsh language TV, then broadened out successfully into other languages. But we've also been successful at bringing new investment in, production companies, Bad Wolf, Sony owned, Grey Point Media, US owned, big productions houses in Cardiff. And it's a classic example that we really have in Wales, Cardiff particularly. We have a competitive edge. We have a skills base and a cluster of businesses that we can use successfully to attract investment. And I'm pleased the Welsh Government's creative arm have been successful in supplementing that and using that in the marketplace. So it's a good example where we do have a competitive advantage and we can use it effectively in promotion and marketing.
Professor Crescenzi, do you think the government has any role to play in the creative sector in attracting investment and promoting it?
Well, I mean, having said, like we discussed, the competition landscape, we are discussing a relatively limited number of foreign investment in this space with competition from multiple like other regions. So that's a complex landscape. The government can definitely like play a role by investing in existing strengths, like was mentioned before, in particular in Cardiff, like trying to nurture what exists already is a way to allow the market to bring the investment that are organic vis-a-vis what exists already. I think also an important element can be in the creative component of non-creative industry activities. So think about like manufacturing and things that where you do things, or other services that might involve a creative component. So not necessarily like targeting the creative industry as a sector, but the creative industry as a function. It's something that can complement other activities, that can become like part of the local value proposition across the sectors. I think this might be something interesting.
Andrew Ranger.
Thank you very much. Along a similar line, but if you'll indulge me, a report by Sport Wales highlighted that for every £1 invested in Welsh sport, it generates £4.44 in social benefits. And speaking from direct experience, because I'm the MP for Wrexham, we've seen huge investment into sport in Wrexham, which is, giving the benefits widely across our community and beyond that. So, in your view, what additional steps can be taken to position sport as a central element of brand Wales and attract further investment in this sector? And is that something we should pursue? So perhaps if I start with James Gardiner, just very briefly, please.
Yeah, so I think it's... I looked at the Wrexham example as it was compared to other parts of the UK. We actually conducted work where we were looking comparatively at the sector and the FDI profile. And, I do think it's important as it relates to the branding point. It feels like a difficult FDI proposition to generate in the same way that you would build a sort of a skills base and an ecosystem with certain other sectors like life sciences or manufacturing or tech. So I do think of the creative, sport and sort of media sector as all being quite different. Their impact is probably different in terms of, job creation and its profile. So I don't think there's a very easy answer with sport. I think if anything, it probably is much more personality led as opposed to, sort of a number of C-suite executives gathering around a table trying to orchestrate that sort of magic that's been seen with Wrexham. So how does that play into a sort of regions FDI strategy? I think is a much more intangible strategy that would be created than a much more analytical one that would be done for some of these other sectors. It feels like a fundamentally different beast, but very important, I think, when you're thinking overall strategically to the kind of lead generation that comes to investments for a region. So I would be not necessarily focusing on it as the subject of massive capex and job creation in the same way that those other sectors are, but rather as a sort of necessary component to the wider branding of Wales, personally.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything to add to that?
Just very briefly, I think there is something interesting in kind of the supply chain back from major sporting industries or venues. So, from in North Wales, I know there's something being invested in turf technology, for example. And if you take that supply chain all the way back to health and activity and back to the NHS, there's lots of entrepreneurial businesses going back down that chain, which have a reference back to the sports piece. Yeah. But I do agree it's a very strong as branding.
Great, thank you. And see, Mr. Poole, you've got your hand up. It'll need to be brief, I'm sorry, but if you wanted to come in.
Just quickly to say there are marketing and networking advantages that we can use, that we can exploit through attracting major sporting events to Wales. And we found it very, very useful in bringing investors, entrepreneurs to major events when perhaps they may not have come to Cardiff or Wales. So we can use them effectively as long as we get the selling message right when the investors arrive.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Claire Hughes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Across the kind, so just one quick question to you, Mr. Poole. In your experience, how effectively do you think that UK government, Welsh government and local government work together to attract and secure inward investment?
I think it does work, but it doesn't. It's a difficult question to answer because we're at the local government are at the bottom end of the chain. Mm-hmm. We don't actually see the inquiries, so there may well be many inquiries which are being processed by UK and Welsh government that may not arrive at our desk. Generally, there's good levels of cooperation taking place. Could they be better? I think they can. Could there be more transparency in terms of sharing opportunities and leads? Yes. So I think it's an area that could be worked on. And I note the National Audit Office produced an analysis on FDI in England and talked there about perhaps the lack of knowledge of some sub-regional spaces within England in terms of the product and offer and how that can be improved. There's no better way of improving your knowledge of sub-regions by engaging or actively with local government in Wales or England or within the city regions, etc. So it's not a perfect answer, but I think that's a reasonable assessment from my perspective, yeah.
Thank you, and it probably goes back to that point that you've mentioned before on data as well and that other people have said. So, yeah, thank you. Shall
I move on to Jill German, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to have a look at, so obviously we want to promote inward investment, but we want it to be spread across the country in Wales. So I just wondered your thoughts on how Wales can reflect its regional strengths in investment promotion campaigns. So with regards to existing infrastructure and transport links, the kind of thing that would really attract an inward investor. So for example, in my area of North Wales, we have good transport links between the North West. It's been mentioned on a couple of occasions that North West are doing well with regards to attracting investment. So how do we make sure that geography and the fact that we've got rail, road, air taking us all over the world and so close to the North West, how do we make sure we get that out there? Could I start with Nan, please?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Well, as a North Walian, I have a lot of empathy with what you're saying. But I think from a diaspora perspective, I think this is a very rich theme, actually, a theme, because people are very connected back to where they have that heartbeat, back to Wales. And so I think that is something to use. I think also they have a relatively low level of knowledge of what's going on now in modern Wales. They largely are getting it from social media, which is absolutely fine, but it's not enough. And I feel it's largely not coordinated enough to reach them. So I think a lot of what we've talked about today is actually about intentionality, deliberately planning and doing things. And I think that at a sub-regional level, I would always say it should be within the overall umbrella of the Wales brand. But there is room there for authenticity, for difference, but it must be communicated. And go for the easier targets, I would say, or the targets that have warmth towards you already, that are ready for you.
Do you think there is scope to develop this sort of kind of mini region that's cross-border? I've spoken about it with colleagues in the North West before, that we feel like we're perhaps missing a trick.
Well, I absolutely don't see why not, and as long as there's something in it for both parties and it's got a mutuality. I mean, South Wales and the South West, there's quite a lot going on there. Cardiff and London, I think there's lots going on there, very, very close. So in the North West, where things are going well, I think it could be an opportunity, but I'm not an expert in that.
Sure, thank you. Riccardo?
If I may, I think an important point is not necessarily thinking about spreading FDI, because FDI have an intrinsic tendency towards clustering, because they need very often proximity to other investment or proximity to other firms that supply some key inputs for their activities. So it's very very difficult as an objective to try and spread FDI as such. Where I think there is an important role for public policy is in spreading the benefit of FDI. So really seeing, okay, what can local firms, in particular benefiting from a good infrastructure, connect to in terms of foreign firms that can be serviced by domestic firms? How can we leverage domestic and global supply chains and value chains in order to benefit from them and use them as stepping stone to increase the value that we add at the local level? So I think, of course, I mean, when presenting an overarching Welsh value proposition to foreign investors, you need then to represent the heterogeneity that exists and play on the strengths of the different local systems. However, it is very important when thinking about the policies for FDI to think about the benefits and ask the question how different localities can benefit from investment wherever they are in the country, really. I think this is key.
Sure, and I accept that completely, which was linked to my point as far as it's drawing the boundaries more widely from the northwest, because we're an hour away and there's the airports, the roads, so it just seems a good opportunity to, as you say, to just widen that zone of investment, but put it into an area up in the north, which is very different from the south in lots of ways. Ken, I could see you nodding when you were talking about the links between Cardiff and London. I know you're local authority. I'm previously local authority as well, so there is lots to be done to build relationships. I wondered what your thoughts on it were.
No, I think it's a very, very good point. I think we can get over preoccupied with boundaries in government and forget that perhaps from a business perspective, they're not aware of those boundaries. Perhaps what they're more interested in when you look, for example, I know the northeast of Wales very well. I work there in the private sector with many of the businesses there. The boundaries between Wales and the northwest of England to a business are non-existent. It's the functional travel to work area that's important. And like in Cardiff, for example, we and southeast Wales and the Cardiff capital region, we talk about the breadth of the accessibility, taking in Sevenside as well. So sometimes I think we can get too preoccupied with boundaries. Let's look at the broader connections and demonstrate to businesses the importance of our connectivity in connecting up a much larger labour market and a functional labour market, and just forget about the boundaries, because businesses will be recruiting across boundaries and across spatial areas as well.
Thank you, James. There's a couple of emphatic nods from you as well, so I wondered if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. Particularly, you have to put yourself in the mind of the foreign investor. They are really coming in pretty cold sometimes into UK regions. They really fundamentally don't get a lot of the differences anyway. So what we would discuss as business fundamentals, infrastructure, will their investment have a surrounding area of a strong culture, places for their employees to go out and have a life, local skills? What's the connectivity like in the local area? These are all, when we've worked directly with major investors from States, from China, from India, these are all the questions going through their head at the early due diligence phase. They may not have even engaged with government at all before coming over. So they may have come over with a handful of executives. They may have, some kind of local connection, an individual person helping them. And there isn't necessarily always someone there selling the assets to them. They're often looking at, okay, well, we're considering this location somewhere else in Scotland. We're looking at Porto and we're looking at Krakow, and these are these are the places. Let's weigh it all up against our sort of due diligence KPIs, and we'll narrow the list down. So absolutely, borders are effectively meaningless in some cases. But when they get to things like, and I'll give a very tangible example, you've seen an American investor totally rule out investing in Glasgow, for instance, down to planning regulations. and go instead to Manchester, where they've had a very business-friendly body on the other side with their hand out saying, how can we help? How do we get you there faster? And that's really what's needed. It goes back to my point of very front-facing, very connected to business, arm's-length body maybe that is, in market and not just waiting for investment to come, but sort of very, very proactive is what will get investors through at that early stage.
Thank you. That's more power to my elbow to make the case for it from you all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm hoping we're going to get 2 final quick questions in, so we're really going to have to pace ourselves. Anne Davis, please.
All I want to know is, what is brand Wales and how can we make the most of it? I'll ask Nan first, if I may.
Brand Wales is in actuality very future-looking. We've got a lot of great assets from the Future Generations Act, the way we're now looking at further education and higher education across one body. Lots of the things we've talked about today, we are on the front foot. I think we are not coordinated enough, and we don't talk about it enough. For a very chatty nation, we seem to have an aversion to talking about ourselves on the world stage, and we need to do that more, but in a coordinated way.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, so it's definitely not branding, not my wheelhouse necessarily, FDI much more so, but as it relates to FDI, I think, a body that has very detailed knowledge of the key assets and strategies is very key. And, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of having that sort of coherent strategy that's focusing on the exact sectors and countries, etc. And that it currently doesn't seem to be there, and it's not there when we've surveyed investors. That's not necessarily my perception, but investors' perception. What we do know, and I was saying this to Nan last week, is that we know Wales is very important as a potential destination to investors, but that doesn't seem to follow through in the numbers in the same way it has with other regions. So that perhaps tells you that the branding is actually strong as is in some intangible ways. Wales is frequently, outside of Scotland, the next location that's being considered. So that perhaps tells you that between branding and landing the investment, there is a disconnect somewhere in there. And it isn't perhaps a rebranding that's required, but a connection of branding to landing that investment.
So. Lovely. Professor? Then I'll come to Mr. Poole.
I agree on the point on landing. So it's really important to have like a body, like a phone number that makes lending easier, and the embeddedness of the investment. So the creation of connection between the investment and the local economy. This is fundamentally important beyond the brand that is clearly exists already, and the data confirm that. So it's not like a new location to be placed on investors' map. It's to make sure that things can happen and can happen swiftly in a highly competitive landscape. In terms of value proposition, one important point in my view is leveraging the green dimension as well, that we have not discussed beyond energy. What is it that investors can do in Wales that can contribute to the greening of the economy, that can contribute to sustainability? I think Wales might have an important point of advantage there beyond renewable energies.
And very briefly, Mr. Poole, I'm sorry to ask you to be brief.
No, quite simply, we need a strong, unified brand which highlights Wales' unique assets, while ensuring all stakeholders communicate these messages consistently.
Brilliant, thank you.
Been prepared earlier.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the final question. Andrew Ranger, please.
Right. So this is to everyone, starting with Mr. Poole. It's a quick fire one, so if you just be in a few words, please. We just wanted to know, what would the one change from government, if you could ask for one change from government to improve the promotion of Wales as an investment destination, what would that be? I think you've touched on it already, but starting with Mr. Poole.
We've talked about a lot of these issues today, but I think importantly, we need more resource. I think marketing resource, promotion resource, when we look at what other regions, countries are putting into the marketplace, we need to be putting more resource in and telling people, investors, we are interested in you investing in Wales, but we need resources to do that.
Great, thank you. Ms Williams?
I would say go for warm targets in the very short to medium term, because you can, and it will have bigger benefits, and coordinate that, which is partly resource, but I think it's also bringing resource together that already exists and coordinating it. That's what I would ask for.
Great, thank you. Mr. Crescenzi?
Yeah, I think the point is streamlining and simplification. So that's crucially important to make it possible for like Wales to emerge and cut through the noise. It's very important to have a simplification of the system and a more targeted value proposition.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Gardiner.
I think a combination of Ken and Nan's answers. So resource of a preferably sort of arm's length, very business focused body, with a team that is properly over the strategy and details. And that focus on warm targets is important, not just from the diaspora point of view, but that we know that there are plenty of warm targets in the UK and in terms of expansionary investment, not just out there looking for net new stuff too. So, there's plenty of work can be done there, and we see that is the case elsewhere. The profile is really pretty big. So that would be my answer.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and that's perfect timing. We've finished spot on time. I want to say thank you to all 4 of your witnesses, those of you in the room, 2 of you in the room, and 2 online. Thank you so much for giving us a second bite at the cherry, if you like. It's been really useful. Indeed. So thank you. I'll now bring this session to a close. Order.
Thank you, Chair.